Donald Trump has apparently become frustrated about higher recent rates of border crossings and also his difficulty in fully building the border wall in the first year of his presidency. And apparently he's been taking his frustration out on his employees, and not just low-level ones. It goes all the way up to his interactions with Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Trump was apparently furious, according to a source, with Nielsen, telling her he didn't think she was doing enough to secure the border. But Nielsen stood her ground, citing the law in certain instances, the source said. A separate White House official confirmed that Trump exploded over immigration in front of the cabinet. The official described the remarks as, quote, angry and heated, but also as fairly typical for Trump on the issue. And in response to that, two people told The Times that Nielsen, the cabinet head who oversees agencies responsible for immigration enforcement and border security, drafted a resignation letter. And there were a few specifics cited. One was she apparently was somewhat resistant to or hesitant when it came to the separation of families coming across the border. He was not a fan of that, and he doesn't like specifically, and they sort of referenced this, that during the first year of his presidency, border crossings dipped down significantly, but now they are starting to inch up again. Not at historic levels or anything like that, but a little bit higher, and he finds that to be incredibly frustrating.
I just have to quickly comment on the fact that she has mentioned some reservations about separating family members at the border. This is something the Trump administration has been in favor of because they see it as a deterrent. If you know that your child is going to be taken away from you and you're going to be turned back at the border, well, you're less likely to try to cross as a refugee.
Yeah.
Now, think about what happens. Oftentimes, these kids get taken away. Oftentimes, they're babies, and then they're in US custody while the parent is shooed away. So what happens to that baby? What happens to that child? Oftentimes they're just in detention indefinitely, right? Like, it is a hideous, horrendous thing to do. So the fact that she has voiced any reservation about that is a good thing, but Trump sees that as, oh, now it's time to berate her.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, they had originally said in response to this that she drafted a resignation letter. In the initial narrative about this, the White House attempted to fight back against that idea. There was a statement put out by a DHS spokesman who said the New York Times article alleging that the secretary drafted a resignation letter yesterday and was close to resigning is false. The secretary is hard at work today on the president's security-focused agenda and supporting the men and women of DHS Gov, which is interesting because later on, John Roberts had the scoop. John Kelly told me this afternoon that after yesterday's cabinet meeting where real Donald Trump berated Secretary Nielsen, Kelly called Nielsen to implore her not to quit over it, which is an odd thing to spend your time doing if she had no cause to quit, had expressed no interest in quitting. So once again, these official statements coming out of the White House mean absolutely nothing.
I mean, the White House denied it, so it's confirmed true.
Like basically,
that's how it works now.
Yeah.
John Roberts, he's at Fox News, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, they do have some sources inside the White House, and so that's pretty good indication that she had done the resignation letter. And which makes me respect her a tiny bit more. She works in the Trump administration, so I can't go that high. I think there's two parts of this story. One is Trump yelling at people when he doesn't know anything and doesn't understand the complexity or nuance of any issue. And if you have an ounce of self-respect, you'd, of course, immediately think about resigning. Most of the people who work for Trump do not have an ounce of self-respect, so they just take it from King Joffrey sitting there making a jackass of himself while having no idea that he doesn't know what he's talking about and yelling at people that are far more intelligent than him. We might disagree with some of those folks, but clearly some of them are bright and obviously way, way brighter than Trump. So in this case, it might be that there are certain migration patterns that affect it. There might be conflicts in Central America that lead to an increase in immigrants crossing the border, having nothing to do with the policies, right? It might have to do with socioeconomic conditions. It might have to do with legal precedents and decisions that are being handed down. So as Nielsen probably tried to explain that to him, the man-child probably grew angry. No, I just want it down there. I mean, how much can you take of that? I mean, I couldn't take any of it. Look, do you want to know what's actually happening, or do you want to scream like a total idiot, right? That's what I would ask him. But they have to sit there and take it from a guy with not only an inferior intellect, but almost no intellect. So now there is a second part of it, and this is where it's a mixed bag for Trump. Like, look, he thinks there is something you can do, and he wants the people that he picked to be as vicious as he is. He's like, I want you to separate the families. And maybe that'll affect things. And to be fair to Trump, maybe it will. Maybe if you're that vicious, I mean, to flesh out what Anna was saying, like the mechanics of how they split up the families is interesting. There is a rule that kids have to be released within 3 weeks. But now the new rule that Sessions is trying to enforce is that the adults be imprisoned for up to 6 months for crossing the border. Before, you would say, okay, you crossed the border illegally, now we're gonna send you back where you came from, and we wouldn't bother wasting resources on imprisoning people who were trying to improve their lives and bring hope to their family. Now we can't have it because it's illegal to cross the border, but we didn't waste resources. Now Trump is saying, no, make sure you punish them and split up their family. And God knows where the baby or the kid goes when they're released in 3 weeks and their parents are still in a US jail. I mean, that is unreal to a normal feeling human being. But Donald Trump has no empathy for anyone that isn't named Donald Trump or perhaps Ivanka Trump. So now that's both being fair and unfair to Donald Trump. Fair that, hey, Nielsen, I hired you to be a terrible person. And if you're not gonna be a terrible person, I'm gonna fire you and get someone who will be sufficiently barbaric. That is fair in that is his purview. He's allowed to do that as president.
But he also fails to understand how our system of government works, which is really pathetic considering the fact that he is the head of the executive branch. She can't unilaterally do things that Congress is supposed to vote on. Congress is supposed to vote on policy decisions or legislation. And they are complete and utter failures when it comes to the issue of immigration because they haven't succeeded in passing anything of substance. So look, she's not queen of border control. You know, she's not able to wave a magic wand and do whatever hideous thing Trump wants her to do. There are limitations to his power, there are limitations to her power. And by the way, they are separating families. And yes, I know the law is supposed to work that way where the children are released within 3 weeks, but it doesn't often work that way. Oftentimes, they attempt to find a family member in the United States who is a US citizen to release the child to, and then when they're unable to do so, what do? They just keep them indefinitely.
Yeah.
That is a disastrous policy. And by the way, a disastrous policy that ends up costing you, the taxpayer, even more money if you're concerned about the economics of all this immigration talk.
And just one more quick thing about that. Look, I know right-wingers love punishment. They like being mean to other people and they get great joy out of that. But have you ever had kids? So imagine taking a 3-year-old and because there's no family in the US and you don't know where to send them and you've locked up their parents for 6 months, then you have to keep them in a 3-year-old in prison for 6 months with no access to their parents. In some sort of, whether you call it a prison, a detention facility, whatever you want to call it, with guards guarding the 3-year-old. You know what that's gonna do to a 3-year-old? I mean, what parent would say, yeah. I mean, how dare they try to pursue their American dream? They technically violated their law crossing the border trying to improve their lives. Let's crush the 3-year-old and give it some trauma that it couldn't possibly recover from. So, okay, I guess that's what you signed up for. I hope you're really, really proud of that.
And we also can't continue compartmentalizing all these political issues that lead to people wanting to seek refuge in the United States. If we genuinely want to convince people, hey, maybe it's better for you to stay in your own country, let's stop perpetuating a drug war that leads to these emboldened cartels in Central American countries. That's where the violence is coming from. We need to strip them of their power, and the best way to do that is to legalize drugs. Like, I know people don't want to have that conversation, but let's look at the root of all these issues rather than putting Band-Aids at gushing wounds. That's what's happening right now.
Well, look, I mean, to Donald Trump's credit, what he's doing is making the United States a place that you would not want to move to legally or illegally. So, maybe it's not intentional, but the things that he's doing are so, I mean, they're horrific. Jailing children, separating families. Like, you can't, if I heard about that happening in Spain, I wouldn't go to Spain just in case that, they made a mistake in my papers and they separated me from my kids or something like that if I had kids. But it's just what he's doing to the United States as a whole is making us weaker, it's making us worse. And if I lived outside this country, I wouldn't want to move to it.
Yeah, and with one, I'll be quick on this, but while he wants his Secretary of Homeland Security to become vicious, it might work in the long run. Certainly many of his aides are, but we also know that effect is being felt throughout the country when many of his supporters are becoming far more vicious. I mean, we talked this week about the number of threats against abortion clinics has tripled in the past year. The number of extremist groups is skyrocketing in various forms. I mean, it might be that he was just appealing to some of the darkest historic tendencies in America when he became president, but he's clearly exacerbating them now. He doesn't just shed light on these things, he makes them actually worse in a number of different ways.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.